Picture a household where the king himself checks what time you woke up. Now picture that same king on a bad night, screaming for 11 hours straight, while 8 men hold him down on a mattress dragged into the middle of the floor. That's not a metaphor. That's Tuesday, some weeks, inside the household of King George III. A place where you could be polishing silver buckles for a monarch famous for his plain habits, and modest table in the morning, and by midnight be standing outside a locked door listening to that same monarch beg to be let out, while grown men twice your size, strain against him with all their weight. We're going back there tonight. Not to the throne room, not to the ceremonies with the trumpets and the ermine, the part everyone already knows. We're going into the part nobody puts on the coins, the narrow back stairs, the airless servants' hall, the rota nailed to a door that decides whether you eat before midnight or after. One household, one new servant, 30 days that will tell you everything about why almost nobody who started this job finished the first month of it. So I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know anymore whether you're falling asleep to them or lying there wide awake picturing men in powdered wigs having the worst month of their lives. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your hands are the first thing that tell you this was a mistake. Not your head, not your stomach, not the ache already climbing up the back of your neck. Your hands. They're raw across both palms, the skin gone shiny and tight where the rope handles of the coal scuttle have been soaring back and forth since before the sun came up, and when you flex your fingers there's a small tearing sensation at the base of your thumb that makes you suck air in through your teeth. It is not yet 7 in the morning. You have already carried coal up 4 flights of a back stair so narrow your shoulders brush both walls, laid 3 fires, scraped yesterday's ash into a bucket with your bare hand because nobody gave you a shovel small enough for the grate, and been told twice that you are doing it wrong. Your name is Josiah Rye. You're 16 years old, the 3rd son of a Windsor saddler, and 11 days ago your father walked you up to the park gate at Windsor and told the porter that his boy could read, write a fair hand, and had never once in his life been idle. It got you a place, under-footman, 3rd rank, in the household of King George III. Your father shook your hand like you were a grown man and told you that this was the making of you. Steady work, a royal wage, however small, a roof that would never leak. He said all this with real pride in his voice, the kind that makes you stand up straighter without meaning to. He didn't mention that 11 boys have held this exact position in the 2 years before you. 11. You know this now because old Hob told you on your 3rd day, counting them off on his fingers while he showed you how to trim a candle wick, and by the time he ran out of fingers on one hand and started on the other, you had stopped believing he was joking. You'll not last the month, Hob said, not unkindly. Just a fact, the way you'd mention rain coming. None of them do. Ledger boy quit after 9 days last spring. Footman before you lasted 6. Housemaid before him 3, and she only stayed that long because her sister worked the laundry and talked her out of running the first 2 times. You'd asked him why. He'd looked at you like the answer was written on your forehead in charcoal. You'll see, he said. Give it a week. It has been 11 days, and you're starting to understand. The household of King George III does not run on cruelty exactly. Nobody has struck you. Nobody has starved you. The food, when you get to it, is plain but plentiful. Boiled mutton and bread and small beer, more than you ate most weeks at your father's table. That's not the trouble. The trouble is time. The household runs on time the way a millstone runs on water, grinding without stopping, without mercy, without the smallest patience for anyone who cannot keep pace with it. There is a book, an actual book, bound in worn leather, kept in the steward's room, and in it is written down the precise minute that every single thing in this palace is meant to happen, every day, forever, apparently. Amen. The king rises at 6, not 6:15. 6. He has risen at 6 every morning of his adult life that illness or catastrophe has not prevented, and the entire enormous machinery of Kew and Windsor and St. James's turns itself to that single fixed point, the way iron filings turn to a magnet. Which means the kitchen fires must be lit by 4:30, which means the water must be hot by 5, which means you, Josiah Rye, third under-footman, must have 3 grates blazing and the passage swept, and the king's private stair free of every last speck of yesterday's dust, before a bell you cannot see rings in a room you're not permitted to enter because His Majesty cannot abide disorder, cannot abide lateness, cannot abide, it is said, so much as a picture hung a half-inch off true. Your shoulders ache from the coal, your palms sting from the rope, and it is not yet 7 o'clock. You straighten up from the third grate, wipe your forearm across your face, and immediately regret it, because your forearm is black with soot, and now, so, you're quite sure is half your face. Somewhere down the passage a door opens and closes with the particular soft click that you've already learned means someone important is moving through the house, and you freeze the way Hob taught you to freeze, back pressed to the wall, eyes down, breath held, until the footsteps pass. They do not pass. They stop. You, boy. You look up. A tall man stands over you in the dim grey light of the passage, dressed head to foot in the sober brown livery of the senior household staff, a chain of office at his throat that catches what little light there is. This is Mr. Braithwaite, groom of the chambers, and in 11 days you have learned 3 things about him with total certainty. He never raises his voice, he never forgets a fault, and he has never once, in your hearing, said a single word of praise to anyone. Sir, you manage. His eyes go to your face, to the smear of soot across your cheek, down to your hands, black to the wrist, and then slowly, terribly, to the small heap of ash you've not yet finished clearing from beside the third grate. What time, he says, does His Majesty rise? 6 o'clock, sir. And what time is it now? You do not have a watch. Nobody your rank has a watch. You guess, and guess wrong, because the true answer, which you learn a half-second later, when he produces his own from his waistcoat and shows you the face without a word, is that it is 6 minutes past 6, and His Majesty, if the household runs the way it is meant to run, is already awake, already dressing, already moving through rooms that should by now be silent, warm, and utterly beyond reproach. You feel the blood leave your face. I was held up in the scullery, sir. The water hadn't... I did not ask for an explanation. His voice does not rise. It never rises. That is somehow worse than shouting. I asked you a question, and you have answered it. You're behind. Do you understand what happens to boys who are behind in this household? Yes, sir. Say it. Your throat is dry. They're turned off, sir. They're turned off, he agrees. And for one terrible moment you think this is it. 11 days and you'll be walking back down to your father's shop with your bundle under your arm, and the whole street watching you go. The boy who couldn't hold a place at the king's own house for a fortnight. But Braithwaite only looks at you a moment longer. the way a man looks at a horse he's deciding whether to buy, and then he says, "Finish here. Wash your face and hands before you're seen in the upper passage again. If I catch you behind the clock a second time this week, you will not need to hear the rest of that sentence from me. You will simply not be here." He walks on. You stand very still until the click of his shoes fades around the corner, and then you let out a breath that shakes on the way out, and your hands, when you look down at them, are trembling, not from the cold, though the passage is cold enough that you can see your own breath, but from something colder still, something that has been building in your chest since your third morning here, and has not once let go. You think, standing there with your pulse still hammering, of the letter your father wrote out for you before you ever arrived. Tucked now inside your small wooden box upstairs, the one your mother made him copy out twice because his first attempt, she said, sounded too much like a solicitor's contract and not enough like a father's blessing. Steady work, he'd written. A roof that will never leak, wages you can be proud of, and the honour, son, of a king's own house. You had read those words 12 times on the cart ride to Windsor, turning them over the way you might turn over a lucky stone in your pocket, and you find yourself now, 11 days and 6 minutes late into your new life, wondering whether your father has ever once, in all his years at the forge, stood frozen with fear over something as small as a heap of unswept ash. You suspect not. You suspect the fears of a saddler's shop are honest, visible fears, a blade that slips, a customer who won't pay, weather that ruins the leather before it's cured. The fears of this house are a different animal entirely, quieter, colder, capable of arriving from nowhere over the placement of a single grate. This is why they don't last the month. Not one single terror. 100 small ones stacked one on top of another, every hour, every day, with no bell ever ringing to tell you that you can finally stop listening for the next one. You finish the grate. Your knees crack when you stand, and the ash bucket is heavier than it has any right to be, and you carry it down the back stair with your forearms burning, and somewhere above you, through 3 floors of stone and plaster, the King of Great Britain and Ireland is being dressed by men whose entire profession is dressing him, in a room so exactly regulated that the chair he sits in to have his hair powdered has stood in the same spot, they say, without moving 1 inch for 11 years. You've heard things about him. Everyone at Windsor has heard things, whispered over the washing lines and the market stalls, the kind of stories that grow taller every time they're told. That he talks to trees, mistaking an oak in the park for the King of Prussia and shaking its branches by the hand. That he can go 2, 3 days without sleeping and talk the whole time, faster and faster, foam gathering at the corner of his mouth, until his voice gives out entirely and he simply keeps moving his lips. That there was a time, years back now, before you were old enough to understand what the whispers meant, when the whole country held its breath, and Parliament argued for months about what happens to a kingdom when its king goes mad. You didn't believe half of it when you started. You believed less of it by your 3rd day, when you actually caught your first glimpse of him from the end of a passage, an ordinary-looking man in a plain brown coat stouter than you expected, with pale, bulging eyes and a habit of talking very fast in short bursts. What? But harmless-looking, almost kindly, the way he stopped to ask a gardener's boy the names of 3 different roses and seemed genuinely delighted by the answers. You believe more of it again now, 11 days in, because you have started to notice the way the senior staff go quiet whenever his name comes up in a certain tone of voice. the way Hobbs' face changes when you ask him a direct question about it, the way there is a room on the second floor of the Queen's Lodge that nobody will explain to you, its door kept locked, its single small window looking out over a section of garden that the gardeners have been told never to work in while certain curtains are drawn. You don't know yet what that room is for. You will. For now, there is coal and ash, and a bucket that needs emptying, and a passage that needs to be silent and warm and perfect before 6:15, which is in 4 minutes, and you run. Your second week teaches you the kitchen, and the kitchen teaches you what real heat feels like. You're sent down on your 9th morning to help carry trays up from the great kitchen, a low-ceilinged brick-vaulted room dug half below ground level, where 6 fires burn at once even in summer, and the air itself seems to have weight, thick and wet and scorching, pressing against your face the moment you step through the door. Copper pots the size of washtubs hang from iron hooks along one wall, dozens of them, each one scoured to a dull gleam by a scullery boy no older than you, and the noise in that room is its own kind of assault. Cleavers thudding into a chopping block, fat spitting in a pan, someone shouting for more wood, someone else shouting back that there isn't any more wood, not until the cart comes. Cook is a broad, red-faced woman named Mrs. Perrin, who you will come to understand, over your following years in this household, commands more genuine fear among the junior staff than Mr. Braithwaite himself, for the simple reason that Mr. Braithwaite's punishments end your employment, while Mrs. Perrin's punishments are administered directly, on the spot, with whatever implement happens to be nearest her hand. Mind the spit, she barks at you, not even looking up from the pastry she's rolling, flour to her elbows, and you have no earthly idea what she means until half a second later, when a boy beside you hauls open the door of the great roasting range, and a wave of heat rolls out that makes your eyes water instantly, and you understand that mind the spit means stand well clear of a door that opens onto something close to the mouth of a furnace. You're given a tray, 2 trays, then 3, stacked with covered dishes that steam faintly through the cloth laid over them, and you're told, sharply, to carry them up the back stair without tilting them, without running, without, God help you, dropping so much as a single spoon along the way, because every dish that leaves this kitchen is accounted for on a list kept by the undercook, and a missing spoon by supper is a missing wage by Friday. Your arms shake by the second flight. The trays are heavier than they look, the china thick and old, and your hands, still soft in these early days, ache with a different kind of strain than the coal scuttle gave you. A burning tightness across the backs of your wrists that makes you grit your teeth and count the remaining stairs under your breath. It's on your 3rd trip down for the next load that you make your first real mistake. You're moving too fast, your legs already remembering the stair better than your mind is tracking the room around you, and you come round the last turn of the passage directly into the scullery boy, carrying a full kettle of water just off the boil, and though neither of you falls, though the kettle doesn't even spill more than a splash, that splash lands square across the back of your left hand, and the sound that comes out of you is not a word at all, just a short, sharp that you're instantly, furiously ashamed of. Under the pump, the scullery boy says, already grabbing your wrist and hauling you toward the cold water himself. More concerned, you understand dimly through the white-hot throb spreading up your forearm about you crying out loud enough to bring Mrs. Perrin down on both of you than about the burn itself. Quick, before it blisters proper. The cold water is its own kind of shock, and you stand there with your hand under the thin, cold stream for what feels like a very long time, your eyes stinging, your jaw clenched so hard it aches, while the scullery boy, whose name you learn is Danny, keeps up a low, steady stream of talk beside you. Not really about anything, just noise to fill the space until the worst of the pain passes. Everyone does it their first fortnight, he says. Everyone. I did it my third day. Took the skin clean off 2 knuckles on the same pump you're standing at now. You'll not do it twice, though. That's the mercy of it. Your body remembers a burn a great deal better than it remembers a scolding. He's right. You never do it twice. The mark stays, faint and pale, across the back of your left hand for the rest of your life, and every single time you catch sight of it in later years, hauling coal or polishing brass or standing at the foot of some stair listening for a bell, you will feel, just for an instant, the particular scorching shock of that second week, and something in you will settle a little, the way an old scar settles, into simply being part of the shape of who you are. You don't tell Mrs. Ansell. You don't tell your father. On the one afternoon a fortnight you're permitted to walk down into the town and see him. You wrap the burn yourself that evening in a strip of clean linen Hob finds for you without being asked. And you go back to work the next morning at 4, same as always, because the household, you are already learning in your second week, does not stop for a scalded hand any more than it stops for anything else. It's near the end of that same week that you see the terrace for the first time. You've heard the other servants speak of it the way you might hear people speak of a fair or a market day, some ordinary evening event that everyone below stairs seems to have an opinion about. And on your 12th evening, your work finished earlier than usual, Hob tells you to come along and see for yourself, and you follow him out through a side gate and around toward the long raised walkway on the north side of the castle where a crowd has already begun to gather. They come from the town, Hob explains, as you find a spot along the low wall at the edge of the crowd. Ordinary people, tradesmen and their wives, a few children perched on shoulders, all of them craning toward the same section of walkway where nothing at all is happening yet. Every fine evening the families in residence, they walk the terrace after supper, and anyone respectable enough to be let through the gate can come and watch them do it. Free entertainment. Better than a play, some of them reckon. Watch them do what? Just walk? Just walk, Hob agrees, and there's something dry in his voice that you're learning to recognize as his particular flavor of humor. That's the whole of it, but you'd be amazed how far people will travel to watch a king take the air. You understand it better once it actually happens. A murmur runs through the crowd, a kind of ripple, and then there they are, the royal family, out walking 2 by 2 along the raised terrace in the last gold light of the evening. The king in his plain brown coat with the queen on his arm, several of the princesses trailing behind in pairs, a small clutch of attendants keeping a respectful distance. There's a band playing somewhere out of sight, something bright and unhurried, and the crowd along the wall doesn't shout or press forward the way you might expect. They simply watch, quiet, almost reverent, some of the women dropping small curtsies as the family passes near enough, the king occasionally raising a hand or exchanging a few words with someone he recognizes among the regular faces. You watch him walk past not 30 feet from where you stand, and it strikes you, seeing him out here in the open evening air with ordinary people gathered to admire him, how completely this scene erases every trace of what you already suspect goes on behind certain locked doors in that same building behind you. He looks, tonight, exactly like what the crowd has come to see. A steady, plain, dutiful king, taking his evening exercise among his family, nodding to his subjects. They love him. you say quietly to Hob, watching an older woman near you wipe at her eyes as the family passes. Properly love him. You can see it. They do, Hob agrees, and they should. He's given them a great deal to love over the years, whatever else goes on that they never see. That's the strange truth of it, lad. Both things are real at once. The king on the terrace and the man behind that locked door, they're the very same person, and the household's whole purpose, near enough, is making certain the crowd only ever gets introduced to the one of him. You think about that for a long time as the family passes out of sight and the crowd begins, slowly, to disperse back toward the town, lanterns bobbing away into the darkening evening. You think about it again, later, alone in your narrow attic bed, your burned hand throbbing faintly beneath its linen wrap, and you decide that you understand, now, a little better than you did a fortnight ago, exactly what kind of machine you've become a very small, very tired part of. You meet the Queen properly for the first time on your 14th day, and it teaches you a different kind of fear than any you've learned so far. Quieter, colder, entirely without shouting. You're polishing the brass fender in a small sitting room you believe to be empty, on your knees with the vinegar-smelling paste worked into a soft cloth, your whole attention fixed on a stubborn tarnished patch near one corner, when a voice behind you, precise, faintly accented, says, "You have missed a spot." You come very close to knocking over the fire irons in your haste to scramble upright and bow, and it's only once you're standing, your heart hammering, your knees still faintly numb from the cold floor, that you understand the voice belongs to Queen Charlotte herself, seated in a chair near the window with a piece of needlework in her lap that she has apparently set down solely to observe your polishing. "Your Majesty," you manage, and bow again, lower this time, unsure whether once was sufficient. She does not smile, but there is nothing unkind in her face either, simply a kind of exacting attention that reminds you, with an odd lurch, of Mrs. Ansell's finger tracing a door handle for the ghost of a smear. She gestures, one small precise movement of her fan, toward the corner of the fender you'd been about to abandon. There, and there also. You're new. "Yes, Your Majesty, a fortnight, ma'am." "You will learn," she says, in the tone of someone stating an established fact rather than offering encouragement, "that this household does not forgive half measures. I have told Mrs. Ansell as much for 30 years, and I will tell her 30 more, God willing. A thing is either done correctly, or it is not done at all, and an incomplete effort insults the person who must look at it afterward a great deal more than no effort would have." You murmur something you hope sounds like agreement, and she returns her attention to her needlework as though you have already ceased to exist, and you kneel back down and finish the fender properly this time, every inch of it, your ears burning the whole while, painfully aware of her presence in the room even though she does not look up again once. It is Hob, later, over supper, who explains to you what you've half already guessed. "The Queen notices everything," he says. "More than the King does, if truth be told, on his good days same as his bad ones. She runs this household the way a captain runs a ship, and she's run it that way since she was younger than you are now, arrived from some German duchy at 17, not speaking a word of English, married a man she'd never met, and set about learning every single rule of every single room in every single house he owned, because nobody was about to hand her the running of it out of kindness. She earned that authority the same hard way you're earning your place here now. Doesn't make her gentler to work under, mind. But it does mean she's never once asked a servant to do something she hasn't already worked out in her own head. exactly how long it ought to take and exactly how it ought to look when it's finished. You think about that a great deal in the weeks that follow, catching occasional further glimpses of the Queen moving through the household's rhythm with the same exacting, unhurried attention she turned on your fender that afternoon, and you decide somewhere around your third week that you would rather disappoint Mr. Braithwaite 10 times over than disappoint her once. A letter comes from your father near the end of your third week, carried up from the town by the same errand boy who brings the household's post, and you're given leave to read it during the brief half-hour set aside after the midday meal, sitting on an upturned bucket in the corner of the yard with the paper held carefully, so as not to smudge your father's careful, laboured hand with whatever coal dust still clings to your fingers no matter how many times you've washed them since morning. He asks how you're getting on. He tells you the forge has been busy, that your younger brother has finally grown tall enough to work the bellows properly, that your mother sends her love and wants to know whether you're eating enough, whether the palace feeds its servants decently, whether you've made any friends among the other boys. It's an ordinary letter, the kind any father might write, and you read it twice through, and somewhere in the second reading your throat goes suddenly, unexpectedly tight, and you have to sit very still for a moment with your eyes stinging before you trust your voice enough to answer any of the questions Hob calls over, mild and curious, from across the yard. You do not write back that night about the coal scuttle, or the burn on your hand, or the voice through the locked door that you have not yet witnessed but have already, on some instinctive level, begun to dread. You write back that you are well, that the work is hard but fair, that you are eating enough and have indeed made a friend, a senior footman named Hob, who has been kind to you. You do not know, folding the letter closed, whether this is a lie exactly. It feels more like a mercy, the same kind of mercy the household extends to itself every single day, holding its worst hours behind a locked door so that the ordinary world outside its walls never has to carry any part of the weight. There is a night, near the very end of your third week, when the weight nearly wins anyway. It comes on you without warning, the way these things do, not during any particular crisis, but on an entirely ordinary evening, coal carried, brass polished, supper eaten, nothing at all remarkable about the day that has just ended, and yet lying in your narrow bed afterward you find yourself gripped by a sudden, overwhelming certainty that you cannot possibly do this again tomorrow. Not the coal, not the bells, not the endless small terrors of Mr. Braithwaite's watch face, and Mrs. Ansell's tracing finger, and the Queen's precise, unhurried attention. You lie there in the dark with your whole chest aching in a way that has nothing to do with the physical work of the day, and you think, with total clarity, that you will get up in the morning and walk down into the town and tell your father you have changed your mind, that this house is too hard, that you would rather work the bellows beside your brother for the rest of your life than climb one more flight of that back stair with a coal scuttle, cutting fresh grooves into palms that never seem to fully heal. You do not do this. Morning comes, the bell rings, your body rises before your mind has fully caught up to the decision, already moving through the first motions of the day out of a habit that has, in 3 short weeks, become stronger than your despair. You lay the first grate, you carry the first pail of water, and somewhere around the third grate, your hands moving through the familiar motions without needing your full attention anymore, you notice that the overwhelming certainty of the night before has quietly, almost embarrassingly, evaporated, the way a fever breaks, and leaves you weak, but recognizably yourself again. You understand later that this is simply what the weight does, some nights, to everyone who carries it, senior staff and newest boys alike. It presses down hard enough to make you certain you cannot bear one more day of it, and then morning comes, and the body, wiser in its way than the mind that despairs the night before, simply gets up and does the next thing, and the next, and the next, until the certainty of the darkness has been quietly outlasted by the plain, unglamorous fact of continuing. Your third week brings a different kind of lesson, one that has nothing to do with fire or water, and everything to do with your own carelessness. You're sent on your 16th day to help air out a set of unused rooms on the second floor of the Queen's Lodge, rooms kept ready but rarely occupied, the kind of task the senior staff hand to junior servants, precisely because nothing important is meant to happen there. You open the shutters, beat the dust from the curtains until your eyes water and your throat goes raspy with it, and it's while you're straightening a small writing desk tucked into an alcove near the window that you find it. A small object, half fallen behind the desk's single drawer, catching the light as you shift the desk to sweep beneath it. You pull it free and find it's a miniature portrait, no bigger than the palm of your hand, set in a thin gold frame. The painted face of a young boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, dressed in the fashions of some years past, with the same pale, slightly protuberant eyes you've come to recognize from the man you now bow to daily on the stairs. You know with a cold certainty that this is not something you were meant to find, and you know, with an equally cold certainty, exactly what would happen to you if you were caught with a royal likeness in your pocket, and no good explanation for it. You should hand it in immediately. You know this. Mrs. Ansell's room is 2 floors down. It would take you perhaps 90 seconds to walk there and set the thing on her desk and be rid of the whole matter entirely. You do not do this. You're not entirely sure, even years later, why you don't. Perhaps it's only that the small painted face, so young, so unguarded, so completely unlike the tired, stout, pale-eyed man you've watched, pace the terrace and shout behind a locked door, catches at something in you that you don't have words for yet. Perhaps it's simpler than that. Perhaps you're 16 years old and exhausted, and this is the first thing in 3 weeks that has felt like it belonged, even briefly, only to you, rather than to the leather book and its unforgiving minutes. You slip it into the inner pocket of your waistcoat, tell yourself you'll hand it in tomorrow, and you do not hand it in tomorrow or the day after that, and by the time a full week has passed you have stopped quite being able to imagine walking into Mrs. Ansell's room and explaining now after all this time why you didn't come forward sooner. You will carry that small painted face hidden and secret for a great deal longer than you currently expect. It will still be with you, in fact, on the night this whole household finally learns exactly how much weight one frightened boy can carry, without anyone else ever noticing the shape of it under his coat. The rest of the morning goes the way every morning goes here, which is to say it goes at a pace that leaves no room in your chest for a full breath. You carry water, 2 full pails at a time, up the back stair, the rope handles biting fresh grooves into palms that have not yet had time to properly heal from yesterday's grooves, the water slopping cold over the rim and soaking through your stockings with every 3rd step, so that by the time you reach the top your feet are numb and squelching inside your shoes. You empty chamber pots, a duty nobody warned you about before you started and that you have decided privately you will never mention to your mother as long as you live. You polish. God, the polishing. Brass door handles, 12 of them on this floor alone, each one requiring the same practiced circular motion with a rag and a paste that smells of vinegar and something chemical underneath, until your own distorted reflection stares back at you clear enough to count your own eyelashes, and Mr. Braithwaite, or worse, Mrs. Ansell, the housekeeper, runs one gloved finger across the surface afterward, checking, always checking, for the ghost of a smear you might have missed. Mrs. Ansell finds one. Of course she does. Again, she says, not looking at you, already moving to the next handle down the passage. And mind the corners this time. The king notices corners. You want to ask how a busy monarch with a kingdom to run, and, if the whispers are true, a mind sometimes fraying at the edges, has time to notice the corners of a door handle. You do not ask. You have learned, in 11 days, that questions here are rarely welcomed and never answered the way you'd hope. You simply pick up the rag again and start over, your fingers already cramping into the shape of the motion, a small ache building along the tendons that you suspect, correctly, will still be there when you finally lie down tonight. There is a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. You're learning its shape. It sits behind your eyes and makes the edges of the passage seem to waver slightly, makes the polished brass swim a little when you look at it too long. Your body has been moving without real pause since 3:45 this morning, and it is not yet 9, and there are, Hob tells you cheerfully over a hurried mouthful of bread at the tail end of breakfast, at least 11 more hours of this ahead of you before anyone lets you lie down. 11 hours, you repeat, and something in your voice must give you away, because Hob laughs, not unkindly, and claps you on the shoulder hard enough to make you stagger. 11 hours is a short day, lad. Wait till there's a drawing room. Wait till there's a birthday. You'll be on your feet from 3 in the morning till past midnight, and glad of every minute you're not being shouted at. How do you stand it? Hob considers this properly, chewing, his eyes going somewhere distant. He's older than you first thought, you've decided, closer to 30 than 20, with the kind of permanently reddened knuckles that come from years of cold water and lye soap, and a way of moving through the passages that suggests he has stopped noticing them as places at all. The way you stop noticing your own front door. You stop fighting it, he says eventually. First week you fight it. Every order feels like an insult. Every clock feels like it's against you personally. You lie awake at night furious about a door handle, if you can credit that. Then one day you just stop. Fighting costs more than it gets you back. You learn the shape of the day and you pour yourself into it like water into a jug. Don't leave any of yourself sticking out over the edge for the day to catch on. That's the trick. That's the whole trick. And if you can't, stop fighting it. Hob looks at you for a long moment, and something in his easy expression goes quiet. Then you don't last the month, he says, same as the others. There's a bell. There's always a bell, and you've learned in 11 days precisely which pattern of rings means which thing is required, a code as intricate and unforgiving as any you might have learned at a proper school, except that a proper school does not turn you off without a character reference for failing to translate it fast enough. This one is 3 short rings, a pause, 1 long. Upper corridor, Mrs. Ansell summons, urgent. You're moving before you've finished your last bite of bread, wiping your mouth on the back of your hand, already half out the door of the servants' hall with Hobbs' laughter following you. Not unkind, just amused. The laughter of a man who has run this exact race 1,000 times himself, and knows precisely how it feels. The passage back up is the same one you've climbed 12 times already this morning, and your legs know it well enough now that they don't need much direction from the rest of you, which is fortunate because the rest of you is occupied with trying to work out what fault you might have already committed today that would require Mrs. Ansell to summon you specifically by name in front of whatever waits at the top of these stairs. It is not, as it turns out, a fault. It is worse than a fault. It is a task. You're to go up, Mrs. Ansell says when you arrive breathless at the top of the stair, and there is something different in her face this morning, something tighter around her eyes that you haven't seen there before in 11 days of watching that face for warnings. The prince's dressing room. His Highness has asked for a boy to carry a message, and every senior footman is engaged elsewhere, and you're what's left. Yes, ma'am. You have no idea which prince. There are several, all grown men now, all with households and habits and tempers of their own layered somewhere above the world you actually inhabit. But you don't ask, because asking has already cost you today. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not look directly at His Highness longer than it takes to receive his words. You will bow. You will listen. You will repeat the message back to confirm you have it correctly, and you will leave by the same door you entered. Do you understand? Yes, mum. Go. You go. The upper corridor is a different country from the one you've spent 11 days learning. The passages down below, the ones you know, are narrow and undecorated, cold stone underfoot, walls the same flat plain colour from one end to the other. Up here the floor is carpeted, a deep red that swallows your footsteps entirely, and the walls are hung with paintings in gold frames, so heavy you find yourself wondering, absurdly, how many footmen it took to hang them, and what happened to the ones who dropped one. A door stands ajar. You knock as instructed exactly twice, and a voice within, young, impatient, tells you to come in. The prince, when you finally raise your eyes to him for the brief permitted moment, is younger than you expected, dressed in a half-finished state that makes it clear his own man has stepped out for something. One arm still bare where a shirt has not yet been properly settled, and he is standing at the window with his back mostly to you, looking out over the garden with an expression you can't quite read. You, a boy, take a message to the stables. Tell them I want my horse readied within the half hour. Not the usual hack, the grey. Yes, your Highness, the grey, within the half hour. And tell them if it's late again the way it was last week, I'll have Grimshaw's wages docked myself. Yes, your Highness. He waves a hand without turning around, dismissal, and you bow backward, the way you've been drilled, and you're almost to the door when he speaks again. Quieter this time. Not really to you at all. Is my father awake yet? It is not really a question aimed at you, but there is nobody else in the room, and the silence stretches long enough that you understand, with a lurch of dread, that some answer is expected. I believe so, your Highness. He rose at 6 as usual. The prince turns then, finally, and looks at you properly for the first time, and whatever he sees in your soot-streaked, terrified 16-year-old face seems to soften something in his own expression, just slightly. As usual, he repeats. There's a weight in the way he says it that you don't understand yet, a weight you will understand a great deal better before this month is finished. Yes, good. Go on then. You go, your heart hammering out of all proportion to the errand, and it is only much later, carrying a fresh scuttle of coal up yet another flight of that same narrow back stair, that you understand what you heard in his voice. Not idle concern, not a son's ordinary question about his father's morning, relief, the particular specific relief of a man checking every single day whether today is going to be one of the bad ones, You don't know yet what a bad one looks like. You will, and sooner than you'd like. The days blur after that, the way Hob told you they would. One grate running into the next scuttle of coal, running into the next set of brass handles, running into the next bell. You must learn to read faster than the boy standing beside you, because there is always a boy standing beside you, and the household does not carry passengers. You lose the girl from the linen room on your 14th day. Her name was Susan, freckled, quick-fingered, barely 15, and you'd exchange perhaps a dozen words with her in total, mostly about the impossible cold of the water in the scullery. But you'd noticed her, the way you notice anyone enduring the same grinding machine you're enduring yourself. She is caught, on the morning of your 14th day, folding a linen sheet with the crease pressed slightly wrong, a fault so small you would never have seen it yourself. And Mrs. Ansell's voice carries clean down 2 flights of stairs, flat and final, and by the time you come down for the midday meal, Susan's place at the long table is simply empty. Her bundle already gone from the attic room. No goodbye, no ceremony. Just an absence where a person used to be. "Where'd she go?" you ask Hob, low over the mutton. "Home, I expect." He doesn't look up from his plate. "Wherever home is for her." "That's it. One wrong crease." "It's never one wrong crease," Hob says, and there's something almost gentle in the way he says it. The gentleness of a man trying to spare you a lesson. He already knows you'll have to learn anyway. It's one wrong crease on top of a look Mrs. Ansell didn't care for, on top of a morning where 3 other things went wrong before it, on top of the fact that there's always another girl willing to take the place, and the household doesn't need you specifically. It needs a body that does the work correctly. You're not a person here, Josiah. Not to them. You're a function. You do the function right, or you're replaced by a body that will. You think about that for a long time afterward, scraping ash from a grate with your bare fingers because the little shovel has gone missing again and nobody has replaced it, and you decide you don't like the shape of the thought at all, but you also can't find a single flaw in it, and that's somehow worse than if you could have. By your 17th day, your hands have stopped hurting in the way they hurt on the first day. That is not, you've come to understand, because they've healed. It's because they've changed. The skin across both palms has thickened, gone a strange yellowish colour. Calluses building where the rope handles and the polishing rags and the endless scrubbing brushes have worn their groove into you, and when you catch sight of your own hands now, laid flat on the scrubbed servant's table at mealtime, they don't look like a 16-year-old's hands anymore. They look like Hob's. They look like a man's hands who has been doing this for years, and something in that recognition sits uneasily in your chest, because you are not sure yet whether you want to become the kind of person whose hands look like that. But something else has changed too, alongside the hands, and it takes you until nearly your 3rd week to properly name it. You have stopped fighting the clock, Hobbes' word for it. You wake now, most mornings, a full 10 minutes before anyone comes to rouse you. Your body having learned the household's rhythm the way it once learned the rhythm of your father's forge, the ring of hammer on iron marking out the hours of a day you no longer live. You move through the passages faster than you did, more certain, your feet finding the worn patches in the stone without you having to look down and check. You have learned which of the senior staff can be reasoned with and which cannot, which doors creak and must be opened slowly, which corridors carry sound further than you'd expect and must be crossed in silence. You have learned, without anyone teaching you directly, the particular hush that falls over the entire household on certain mornings, A hush that has nothing to do with any rule written in Mr. Braithwaite's leather book, and everything to do with something upstairs that nobody below stairs will name out loud. There is a state dinner on your 20th day, the first you've been made to serve any part of, and it teaches you a kind of exhaustion you did not know existed before it, an exhaustion built entirely out of standing still. You're posted for most of the long evening against the wall of the great dining room, one of a line of footmen standing at rigid attention with white gloves and a face schooled into perfect blankness, there to fetch and carry at the smallest signal from the senior men actually working the table. And for nearly 4 hours you do not properly sit down, do not properly speak, do not do anything at all except stand, watch, and wait for a signal that may or may not come. Your feet, an hour in, begin to ache in a way entirely different from the ache of carrying coal, a deep, dull throb that starts in the arches and climbs slowly up through your ankles, and by the second hour your knees have started to lock if you hold perfectly still for too long, so that you must learn, without ever appearing to move, the smallest possible shift of weight from one leg to the other, a trick Hob taught you beforehand, and that you are now profoundly grateful for. The dining room itself is a kind of assault on every sense you own. Dozens of candles burn in the great chandelier overhead, throwing off a heat you can feel from 20 feet away, melting wax dripping in slow, silent threads that a junior footman must catch in a small dish before it can fall on the guests below. The smell of the food is almost unbearable by the second course. Roasted meat and rich sauce and the sharp green smell of some herb you don't recognize, your stomach clenching with a hunger you cannot do a single thing about until this whole business is finally over, and the servant's own supper, cold and picked over by then, is finally set out below stairs. The noise never stops either, a constant low roar of conversation and laughter, and the clink of silver against porcelain, punctuated every few minutes by a burst of noise from one end of the table or another, and beneath all of it, if you listen for it the way you've learned to listen for everything in this house, the small precise sounds of the senior footman working, the soft scrape of a serving dish set down exactly level, the murmured confirmation of an order given and received. The king, seated at the head of the long table, eats sparingly, you notice, plainer fare than most of his guests, and speaks rapidly in the short bursts you've come to recognize, moving from one topic to the next with a restless energy that the guests around him seem to find charming rather than alarming, laughing at some observation about the weather or the crops before he's even finished making it. You watch him from your place against the wall, careful never to let your eyes rest on him longer than a heartbeat, and you find yourself, despite the ache climbing your legs and the hunger gnawing at your stomach, unable to look away entirely, fascinated by the strange, ordinary, entirely public performance of it all, a man holding an entire glittering room together through sheer force of habit and duty, the very same duty that will, 3 weeks from tonight, hold you frozen at the foot of a back stair listening to that same voice break apart behind a locked door. By the time the last course is cleared and the guests finally rise to move through to another room for cards and music, your legs have gone almost entirely numb, and it's all you can do to keep your face schooled into the same blank, patient expression you've held for 4 hours, even as your whole body screams at you to simply sit down, anywhere, for even a single minute. You're dismissed, finally, near midnight, sent below to find whatever cold supper remains, and you eat it standing at the long servants' table, because you have genuinely forgotten in the last hour how it feels to sit, and Hob, watching you from across the table with a tired, knowing look, tells you that you did well, that most new boys drop something or sway on their feet or worse during their first great dinner, and that you did neither. You fall asleep that night before you've even properly finished undressing, and you dream, though you won't remember it clearly by morning, of candles dripping wax in slow, endless threads, and a voice at the head of a long table saying the same restless, unhurried words over and over, what, 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 until the words themselves stop meaning anything at all. It is on one of those hushed mornings, your 22nd day, that you finally learn what the locked room is for. It starts, as these things seem to always start in this household, with a bell rung wrong. Not the pattern for an ordinary summons, but something faster, more ragged, rung by a hand that is not counting its own rings the way it should, and every servant within hearing of it freezes for a half-second in a way you've never seen before. Plates lowered, conversations cut off mid-word. Mrs. Ansell's head coming up from her ledger like a hound catching a scent. "That's the upper corridor," she says very quietly, and then louder to the room at large. Everyone to their posts. Now. Quickly. Quietly. You don't know what you're walking into. Nobody tells you exactly, but you can feel it in the way the household's whole rhythm changes around you as you climb the back stair for what feels like the 100th time this month. Doors closing softly on other floors, voices dropping to murmurs, a maid you pass on the second landing with her face gone the colour of old ash, hurrying the opposite direction with an armful of linens pressed against her chest like a shield. You are sent in the end, not into the room itself, thank God, but to stand at the foot of the back stair nearest it. A relay point, there to carry messages down to the kitchens and the apothecary's boy and anyone else who needs summoning. And it is from this post, for the better part of 4 hours, that you hear it. The sound starts as raised voices, muffled through the heavy door, indistinguishable words rising and falling in a rhythm that has no natural pause in it, the rhythm of someone talking and talking and talking without any of the ordinary breaks a conversation should have. Then it rises further, becomes something closer to shouting, one voice above all the others, a voice you recognize with a jolt that goes straight down your spine, because you have heard that voice before, in passing, in the garden, asking a gardener's boy about roses. Then there is a crash, something heavy overturned, glass break-in, and the shouting becomes something else entirely, something with no words in it at all, just raw sound, and beneath it you can hear other voices now, low, urgent. Several men speaking at once in the particular controlled tone of people trying to manage something that does not want to be managed. "Hold him," someone says, clear enough to carry through the door. "Hold him, for God's sake, hold him still." You stand at the foot of that stair with your whole body gone rigid, a coal scuttle forgotten in your hand, and you understand, without anyone ever having to explain it to you in words, exactly what is happening on the other side of that door. The rumours you half believed and half dismissed on your first week here are not rumours. They are simply what is true, on certain days, behind a locked door that the gardeners are told never to look toward. The shouting goes on. It goes on for what feels, standing there frozen with your scuttle of coal, like hours, though you learn afterward it was closer to 2. And somewhere in the middle of it you hear something that will stay with you far longer than you would like. A voice hoarse now, worn down from all that shouting, no longer angry so much as pleading, saying the same handful of words over and over in a broken, exhausted rhythm. "Let me go, I only want to go home. Let me go. You don't know, standing there, what home means to a man who already lives in every palace in the kingdom. You think about it for a long time afterward, lying awake in the attic room you share with two other boys, the sound of that voice looping in your memory no matter how hard you try to think of something else. You think perhaps he doesn't mean any particular house at all. You think perhaps he means something closer to what you mean. Some nights, lying in that narrow bed with your hands aching and your feet numb from cold water, thinking of your father's forge and the smell of hot iron, and a version of yourself that existed before 11 under-footmen came and went in 2 years, and you started to understand why. Everyone means something different by home, but everyone, it turns out, whatever their rank, whatever their crown, is asking for the same thing in the end. Let me go. By the time the household finally exhales late that evening, you have been standing or moving for nearly 16 hours straight, and your legs have gone past aching into a kind of numbness that frightens you more than the pain did. Hob finds you slumped against the wall at the foot of the back stair, your eyes half closed, the coal scuttle still gripped in one hand, though you haven't needed it in hours. "Come on," he says, and there's no teasing in his voice tonight. None of the easy humour from your first week. He takes the scuttle from your stiff fingers and sets it down, and puts a hand under your arm to help you stand properly. You've done well today. Better than most manage their first time. Is he? You don't know how to finish the question. Is he going to be all right? Hob's face does something complicated in the low candlelight. Some mixture of things he isn't sure he should say to a boy 3 weeks into his first situation. He'll settle, he says eventually. He usually does, given a few days. The doctors know what they're about, whatever you think of their methods. He'll come out the other side quieter, ashamed of himself if he remembers any of it clearly, which mercifully he mostly doesn't, and the household will go back to bells and brass and coal scuttles, same as always, and everyone downstairs will act as though today never happened, because that's the rule nobody writes down but everybody knows. What happens up there stays up there. You don't speak of it. Not to the other servants who weren't on duty, not to your family in the village, not to anyone ever for the rest of your life. Do you understand me, Josiah? This is the one rule that matters more than all the others in that book combined. I understand. Good lad. He claps you on the shoulder, gentler than usual. Now go and eat something, and go to bed. Tomorrow the clock starts again at 4. You are given, 3 days after the worst of it, your usual half day to walk down into the town, and it's on that walk, more than at any point during the crisis itself, that you understand the true size of the secret you're now expected to carry. The town is full of talk. Not accurate talk mostly, but talk all the same. Tradesmen and their wives trading rumours across market stalls the way they might trade gossip about any household in the county, except that this household happens to belong to the king, and so the rumours carry further and grow stranger with every retelling. You hear, standing in your father's own shop with the familiar smell of leather and oil settling around you like a coat you'd almost forgotten you owned, no fewer than 4 different versions of what supposedly happened at the castle this week, each one wilder than the last. That the king tried to leap from a window, that he attacked a physician with a fire iron and had to be chained to his own bed, that he is in fact already dead, and the whole business of doctors coming and going is simply the household's elaborate effort to conceal it, until the succession can be properly arranged. Your father, sharpening an awl at his bench, glances up at you part way through the 3rd version, told by a neighbour who's stopped in to buy a strap and stayed to gossip. You'd know, wouldn't you? He says, not quite a question, watching your face carefully. Working up there. You'd have heard the truth of it, whatever's really happened. Every eye in the small shop turns toward you. and you feel the whole weight of the household's one unbreakable rule settle onto your shoulders at once, heavier in this moment than any coal scuttle you've carried in 3 straight weeks. I couldn't say, you tell them, and you're surprised, even as you say it, by how steady your own voice comes out. I'm only a junior man. I don't see much beyond my own passages. It's not entirely a lie, and it's nowhere near entirely the truth, and you can see in your father's face that he knows it, knows you're holding something back, and you can see, too, the exact moment he decides not to press you on it. Some old instinct in him recognizing that a boy who has learned to hold his tongue about his employer's business is a boy who has learned something valuable, whatever it costs him personally to carry it. The neighbour, disappointed, moves on to speculate about the succession instead, and the conversation drifts away from you entirely, and you stand there in your father's familiar shop, surrounded by the smell of leather and the ring of the bell over the door and every ordinary comfort of the life you left behind 3 weeks ago, and you understand with a clarity that will stay with you for the rest of your years in that household, that you have crossed over now into a different category of person than everyone else in this room, not because you know more than they do, though you do, because you have learned to want to know and to still say nothing, and there is no going back once a person has learned that particular skill, to the easy, unguarded talk of people who have never had to carry a secret heavier than their own. You walk back up the hill toward the castle that evening with the last of the daylight fading gold behind you, and you find, oddly, that you're not sorry for the silence you kept. It feels instead like the first real proof you've been given that you belong to something now, however hard that something is, however little credit or comfort it offers in return. 11 boys came before you and did not last the month. You are beginning, walking back up that hill with your father's searching look still fresh in your mind, to understand exactly what separates you from them, and it has very little to do with strong arms or quick hands, and everything to do with a willingness to carry weight that nobody outside these walls will ever see or thank you for. You eat, you barely taste it, and you lie in your narrow bed that night with your whole body throbbing in a dozen different places, and you think about the voice through the door, and the prince at his window asking, "Is my father awake yet?" in that particular tone of daily dread, and Susan's empty place at the table, and Mr. Braithwaite's watch face held out to you in silent judgment on your very first week here, and you understand, finally, completely, why 11 boys came before you and none of them lasted. It isn't the coal, it isn't the water, or the polishing, or the endless bells, though God knows those alone would break plenty of boys who've never known a day's real labour before. It's the weight of it all pressed together hour after hour, with no room left over in a person for anything but the next task and the next and the next, and underneath all of it, always, the low constant hum of a household holding its breath, waiting to see which kind of day tomorrow is going to be. Some boys can't carry that weight. It isn't a failing in them. You've started to understand that too this month, lying awake with your hands throbbing in the dark. It's simply a weight that not every person is built to carry. The same way not every horse can pull the same load, and there's no shame in setting it down if it's crushing you, only sense. You don't know yet on your 22nd night whether you're the kind of person built to carry it. You find out over the days that follow, and the answer, when it comes, surprises you. You're not sent home that night once the shouting finally stops, the way you half expect to be. Instead, near midnight, with your legs barely able to hold you upright any more, Mrs. Ansell finds you still slumped at the foot of the back stair and tells you, in a voice gone flat with her own exhaustion, that the room must be set right before morning, and that she needs hands she can trust not to talk, and that you, it seems, having stood your whole post without once leaving it, have earned yourself that particular honour. You do not want it. You go anyway, because wanting has very little to do with anything in this household, and you follow her up the last flight of stairs you have not yet climbed today, toward the door you've spent 4 hours standing beneath without ever once seeing what lay behind it. The room, when the door finally opens, is not what you pictured. You had imagined, somewhere in the exhausted corner of your mind that had spent 4 hours listening to that shouting, something closer to a dungeon. Chains, perhaps. Bars on the window. What you find instead is an ordinary bedchamber, handsome even, with good furniture and a fine carpet, made almost unrecognisable by what has happened inside it. A chair lies on its side, one leg cracked clean through. A washstand basin lies shattered across the floorboards near the hearth. Water and porcelain fragments soaked into the carpet in a dark stain you're careful to step around. The bedclothes are torn half off the mattress, and there, standing near the window with his back to the room, still in his nightshirt, a blanket draped over his shoulders by one of the two grave, weary-looking physicians who remain in the room with him, is the king. He does not look at you. He does not, you understand from the physician's low-murmured instructions to Mrs. Ansell, entirely know where he is any more, or entirely remember, perhaps, that anyone is in the room with him at all beyond the doctor at his elbow. He is simply standing, staring out at the dark garden, his lips moving slightly, no sound coming out any more, his voice having finally, mercifully given out somewhere in the last hour of shouting. You work in silence, righting the chair, gathering the porcelain fragments into a cloth so they don't cut anyone's bare feet come morning, and it's while you're on your knees beneath the writing table near the window, reaching for a last shard of the basin that has skittered into the shadows, that your fingers close instead around something else entirely. Small, cold, metal. A pocket watch, its case sprung open, the glass over its face cracked through in a single clean line, knocked, you understand instantly, from some pocket or drawer during whatever violence passed through this room tonight. You should hand it straight to Mrs. Ansell, the same as you should have handed in the miniature portrait a full week ago. You know this with the same cold certainty as before, and once again, for reasons you understand better this time, though not entirely, you do not. You close your fingers around it instead, and slip it into the same inner pocket where the small painted face has been riding quietly against your ribs for a week now, and you finish your work, and you leave the room the way you entered it, silent, eyes down, carrying with you now two small stolen pieces of a man's private life that were never meant to belong to anyone but him. It is only much later, lying sleepless in your attic bed with dawn not far off, and your whole body one long ache from crown to heel, that you turn the watch over properly in the thin moonlight coming through the small window, and see, engraved on the inside of the case, a set of initials that are not the king's at all, and a date some 30 years past, and you understand, with a jolt that has nothing to do with fear this time, that this was not the king's own watch at all. It was a gift. Given, the engraving suggests, by a son to a father, on some long-ago birthday, kept close all these years, and broken tonight in the very worst hour of that father's life. You do not know, nothing there, what to do with that understanding. You only know that you cannot now walk it down to Mrs. Ansell's room any more easily than you could a week ago. Because to explain the watch would mean explaining why you never handed in the portrait either, and because some part of you, young and frightened and already beginning to change shape under the weight of this household, has decided that these two small broken things belong for now to no one but you. The household, exactly as Hob promised, returns to its ordinary rhythm within a matter of days. The king reappears, first glimpsed by you again nearly a week later, thinner than before, moving more slowly but recognisably himself, out walking in the park with two of his daughters on either arm. And if you didn't know what you know now, you would never have guessed at what had happened behind that locked door. He stops on that walk to look at something in the border of roses, the same roses he'd once discussed with the gardener's boy, and you happen to be crossing the path some distance off with an armful of linens, and for one strange moment his pale eyes find you. An ordinary under-footman he has certainly never noticed before and likely never will again. And he nods, a small courteous nod, the kind you'd give any stranger you passed on a country lane, and says, "Fine morning." What? "Very fine, your majesty," you manage, and bow, the way you've been drilled 100 times, and he moves on, already asking one of his daughters something about the roses, and that is the whole of the exchange. 4 words and a nod. And yet you find yourself standing there a moment longer than necessary after he's passed, your arms full of linen, your heart doing something strange and complicated in your chest. He does not know what you heard through that door. He very likely doesn't remember himself more than fragments of it, the doctors having told the household as much, that the fever of it burns away the sharpest edges of memory for him, even as it stays carved permanently into everyone who witnessed it. He is this morning simply a man out walking with his daughters, admiring roses, asking after your health as though you were any ordinary person he might meet on any ordinary day. And in a strange way that you turn over in your mind for the rest of that afternoon, unable to quite let go of it, that is exactly what makes it bearable. Not that the bad days don't happen, they happen. You now know, with total certainty, exactly how bad they can be. But the good days happen too in between, ordinary and plain and full of roses, and the household's whole cruel, exacting, unforgiving machinery exists. You begin to understand, not to punish the people caught inside it, but to hold the whole fragile structure together across both kinds of days alike, the terrible ones and the ordinary ones, so that from the outside, from the village, from the newspapers, from the crowds who gather on the terrace some evenings just to watch the royal family walk by, it always looks like nothing at all is wrong. That is the job. Not polishing brass, not carrying coal, holding the illusion steady hour after hour, so that a kingdom of 10 million people can go on believing its king is well. You start to see the whole household differently after that. Mr. Braithwaite's unbending watch-faced judgment, Mrs. Ansell's ruthless eye for a wrongly folded sheet, the book in the steward's room with every minute of every day accounted for down to the exact placement of a chair. None of it, you begin to suspect, is really about brass or linen or chairs at all. It's about control. A household built entirely around the terror of things slipping, because everyone inside it, from the groom of the chambers down to the newest under-footman scraping ash with his bare fingers, has now personally heard what it sounds like when something finally does. You think of Susan again, that afternoon, her single wrongly pressed crease, and you understand her dismissal differently now too. It was never really about the crease. It was about a household so frightened of disorder in the small things that it cannot afford to tolerate even the smallest crack. Because who's to say which small crack is the one that finally lets the whole terrible pressure through? You don't excuse it. You're not sure at 16 that you're capable yet of the kind of forgiveness that would take, but you understand it now in a way you didn't 3 weeks ago. An understanding you're discovering is its own strange kind of armour. The fear catches up with you on your 25th day, the way fear tends to, arriving late and all at once after you've half convinced yourself you're safe. It begins with a word passed quietly down through the servants' hall at breakfast, a search. Something is missing from the room where the king's illness broke over him. Some small article the physicians swear was present before that terrible night, and cannot now be found, and Mr. Braithwaite has ordered every servant who had access to that floor in the days following to have their boxes and pockets turned out before the household sits down to its midday meal. You do not eat your breakfast. You sit with the bread going dry and untouched in your hand while the blood drains slowly out of your face, and Hob, beside you, notices, the way he notices most things about you by now, and leans in close enough that no one else at the long table can hear. "You've gone the colour of a plucked goose," he murmurs. "What is it?" You cannot tell him. You have never told anyone, not in 3 weeks of carrying 2 small stolen things pressed against your ribs every single hour, every single day, through coal and brass and bells, through the terrace crowd and the scullery burn and every bow you've made to a king whose broken watch you are currently at this exact moment, hiding inside a loose floorboard beneath your own narrow bed. "Nothing," you say. "Tired is all." He watches you a moment longer, clearly not believing you, but he doesn't press, and you spend the rest of that meal turning over, in a kind of silent, rising panic, every possible way this could end. You could confess now, this morning, before the search reaches your floor, throw yourself on Mr. Braithwaite's mercy and hope that 3 weeks of good service buys you enough grace to survive the admission that you've been concealing royal property since your 2nd week here. Or you could try, somehow, impossibly, to be rid of both objects before the search finds them, though you cannot for the life of you think how, in a household where every minute of your day is already accounted for down to the placement of a chair. In the end, you do neither. You simply go to work because the bells do not stop ringing for a servant's private terror any more than they stop for anything else, and you carry coal and polished brass with your hands shaking so badly that you drop a rag twice and earn a sharp look from Mrs. Ansell that, on any other morning, would have frightened you considerably more than it manages to today. The search reaches the attic rooms in the early afternoon. You're not there when it happens, sent instead on an errand down to the stables that keeps you away for the better part of an hour, and by the time you climb back up the servant's stair, your stomach has knotted itself into something close to physical pain, certain you will find your box already emptied onto your bed, the loose floorboard already pried up, Mr. Braithwaite already waiting in the doorway with that particular flat, unhurried voice he uses for boys about to be turned off without a character. What you find instead is your room exactly as you left it, undisturbed, the floorboard still snug in its place, and Peter, no, not Peter yet, this is a full 9 years before Peter, a different boy, a laundry hand named Sammy who shares the attic with you and Hob, sitting on the edge of his own bed looking faintly rattled. They went through mine and Hob's, he tells you when you ask, careful to keep your voice light. Not yours. Braithwaite said something about you being on the stable errand and no need to hold up the whole search waiting on one boy. They'd already found what they were looking for anyway. Your knees very nearly give out with the relief of it. They found it then. What was missing? A ring, apparently, turned up wedged down the side of a chair cushion the whole time. Nobody stole a blessed thing. All that fuss for a ring that had simply rolled somewhere inconvenient. You do not sleep well that night regardless, lying awake with the floorboard's small hollow space seeming to hum beneath your bed like something alive, and it's somewhere in the small hours, staring up at the low-sloped ceiling, that you finally admit to yourself the plain, uncomfortable truth of what you're doing. You're not keeping these two small things because you mean any harm by it. You understand that much clearly. But you're keeping them anyway, and the keeping of them has become, without your quite noticing when the change happened, a kind of weight all its own, separate from the coal and the brass and the bells, a private secret weight that only you are carrying and that you cannot set down without finally explaining why you picked it up in the first place. You decide that night that you will return them. Not yet. Not while the household is still raw and watchful from the search. But some day, when the moment is right, when nobody is looking too closely, you will find a way to put both small things back where they can be found by someone who has more right to them than you do. It takes you a great deal longer than you expect that night to keep that promise, but you do eventually keep it. For now, though, there is still a month to finish, and 2 days short of it, on an evening when your work ends earlier than usual and the sky is cleared after a week of low grey cloud, you find yourself climbing the long spiral stair inside the round tower, permitted up for once on an errand carrying a message to one of the equerries billeted in rooms near the top, and when the errand's done you linger a moment longer than you strictly should at the narrow window near the summit, looking out. From up here the whole of Windsor spreads beneath you, the park rolling away, green and gold in the last of the evening light, the town clustered at the foot of the hill, with smoke rising thin and grey from 100 ordinary chimneys, the river a bright ribbon curling off toward places you've never seen and probably never will. Somewhere down there, 3 floors below your own feet, is the locked room where you knelt on a ruined carpet 3 weeks ago gathering broken porcelain into a cloth. Somewhere down there is the servants' hall and the leather book and the long table where Hob will already be saving you a place. Somewhere down there, walking now perhaps along the darkening terrace with 2 of his daughters on his arm, is a king who does not know that an under-footman 3 weeks into his very first situation has been carrying 2 small broken pieces of his private grief, hidden in a floorboard for going on a fortnight. From this height, none of it looks the way it feels from inside. It looks instead almost gentle, a great house settling into evening, its 100 small dramas folded up small enough to disappear entirely into the wide, indifferent, beautiful spread of the ordinary world around it. You stand there longer than you should, the wind cold and clean against your face after a day spent mostly in close, coal-scented passages, and you understand, in a way you couldn't have on your first terrified morning, why your father spoke of this place with such pride. It is a hard house. It has already taught you that with total certainty. But it is also, seen from up here, an enduring one, the kind of house that will still be standing long after every fear you're currently carrying has worn itself smooth and small, the way the stone steps beneath your feet have been worn smooth and small by 300 years of frightened, exhausted, quietly determined feet, exactly like your own. You climb back down before anyone can miss you, and 2 days later, your 28th day arrives grey and drizzling. The kind of morning where the coal won't catch properly no matter how you coax it, smoke rolling back down the flue and stinging your eyes until they stream, and you are on your knees in front of the 3rd grate, wrestling with the stubborn ember when Hob appears in the passage doorway with an expression you haven't seen on him before. "Braithwaite wants you," he says. "Steward's room, now." Your stomach drops the way it dropped on your very first morning, and every fear you've managed to set aside over these last weeks comes flooding back at once. 28 days. 2 days short of the month everyone told you nobody manages. You think of Susan's empty place at the table, of the 11 boys before you, and you follow Hob down the passage with your soot-blackened hands shaking slightly at your sides. Mr. Braithwaite is standing at the steward's desk when you enter, his leather book open in front of him, and for a long moment he says nothing at all, simply looks at you the way he looked at you on that first terrible morning, weighing you like a horse. He's still deciding whether to buy. 28 days, he says finally. "Yes, sir." "You were 6 minutes late your first morning. You've been late on no other morning since." He turns a page in the book, though you suspect he isn't really reading it, simply giving himself something to do with his hands. "Mrs. Ansell tells me your brass work has become acceptable. Cook tells me you've never once complained about the hours, which she assures me is more than she can say for most boys twice your age. And you stood 4 hours at your post during His Majesty's difficulty 3 weeks past without once leaving your station or speaking a word of it to anyone since, which I confess I did not expect from a boy who'd been here barely 3 weeks himself. You don't know what to say to any of this, so you say nothing. And Mr. Braithwaite, for the first time in 28 days, does something you've never once seen him do. He almost smiles. It's a small thing, barely a shift at the corner of his mouth, gone again almost before you're sure you saw it at all, but it's there. "There is a permanent position opening in the second rank," he says. "Better wages. Your own small room rather than the shared attic. I am prepared to offer it to you if you're willing to stay on. Something loosens in your chest, something that has been wound tight since your very first morning here, and you find yourself standing a little straighter without quite meaning to. I'm willing, sir. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet." But there's no real edge in it this time, just Hobbs' old dry humour, worn thin and passed down, you realise with something like understanding, exactly the way it must have been passed down to Hob himself once, by whichever weary senior man trained him. You've a great deal more to learn, and there will be worse mornings ahead than the ones you've already survived. But you've lasted the month, Josiah Rye, when 11 boys before you did not, and in this household, that counts for something. It counts for quite a lot, actually. You leave the steward's room with your soot-blackened hands still faintly trembling, but for an entirely different reason now than the one that carried you in, and you make your way back down the passage toward the third grate, still waiting, still smoking sullenly in the drizzling morning light, and you kneel back down in front of it and coax the stubborn ember back to life with hands that, you notice, almost don't shake at all this time. That evening, your work finally done, you find yourself out in the park in the last grey light before full dark, walking the long way back toward the servants' quarters simply because your legs, for once, don't ache quite as badly as usual, and the air feels good after a day spent mostly indoors. The rain has cleared. Somewhere off toward the round tower a bell is tolling the hour, the same measured, unhurried sound that has marked out every single day of this whole exhausting month, and you find a low rise near the edge of the park where the ground climbs just enough to give you a view back over the whole sprawling collection of roofs and towers and chimneys that make up the palace and its lodges. Smoke rising from 100 fires you now understand intimately, exactly how each one gets lit. From up here it looks almost peaceful. Ordinary even. Just a great house among its gardens, lights beginning to glow gold in a dozen windows as the last of the daylight fails. No sign at all from this distance of the locked room, or the leather book with its unforgiving minutes, or the voice that begged 3 weeks past simply to be let go home. You think about the king, somewhere inside those walls right now, perhaps at his supper, perhaps already retiring, a man who rules more territory than you could name if you tried, and who is, in the end, held together by exactly the same fragile machinery that holds you together too, hour by hour, day by day, one foot in front of the other until the next bell rings. Neither of you, you understand now, standing on this small rise with the evening cooling around you, gets to simply stop and rest whenever the weight becomes too much. The crown does not stop for madness any more than a household does for grief, and in a strange way that thought does not frighten you the way it might have a month ago. It settles something in you instead. If a king must carry his weight through the bad days same as the good, then perhaps a saddler's third son, carrying coal and brass and bells through his own bad days, is not so very far beneath him after all. You stand there a while longer, until the last of the light is properly gone and the cold starts working its way up through your thin coat, and then you turn and walk back down toward the lit windows and the warm, if crowded, familiar chaos of the servants' hall, where Hob will already be saving you a place at the long table, and tomorrow the clock will start again at 4, same as it always does, same as it always will. Months pass, and then years, though they pass, you find, at a different speed than the outside world seems to move. Time in this household is not measured in seasons the way it's measured in a village. It's measured in illnesses, and in between them, and in the peculiar rhythm of a court that never quite stays in one place long enough to grow entirely settled. You learn over that first full year the shape of the household's slow annual migration. Winter finds the family at Kew, that small, cramped, oddly homely huddle of red brick buildings the king is said to love precisely because it is not grand, where the passages are narrower even than the ones you already know, and the whole household is squeezed together tight enough that you can hear, some nights, the princesses laughing together in a sitting room 2 doors down from where you're blacking a grate. Spring and much of the summer bring the long, slow remove to Windsor, wagon after wagon, of trunks and linens and kitchen stores creaking up the hill road, while you walk alongside carrying whatever won't fit, your legs aching by the day's end in an entirely different way than the stair-climbing aches, you but familiar enough now that you barely notice it. And when the social season calls the family to town, there is Buckingham House itself, the Queen's house, grander in some ways and meaner in others, its servants' quarters even more cramped than Kew's, tucked up under a roof line that leaks in a hard rain no matter how many times the roofers swear they've fixed it. You come to know all 3 houses the way you once knew only your father's shop and the lane outside it, each one with its own particular smell, its own particular draughts, its own particular creak in its particular third stair, and you come to understand, moving your whole small store of belonging between them 3 or 4 times a year, that a servant in this household does not simply serve a king. He serves a king who cannot stay still, dragged by duty and habit and the turning of the social calendar from one house to the next, and every single one of those houses must be made ready, must be warm and swept and perfectly regulated, exactly as though the family had never lived anywhere else at all. There is the bad spring the year after your first winter, quieter than the one you witnessed, over almost before the newest servants have fully understood what's happening, and the household exhales again and returns to its bells and its rota exactly as before, there is a long stretch of years after that where nothing worse happens than the ordinary crushing weight of the daily machine, coal and brass and bells and the leather book, and you rise in that time from second rank to first, and then eventually to a position very like the one Mr. Braithwaite himself once held, training new boys the way Hob once trained you, watching them arrive wide-eyed and eager the way you once did, watching most of them last a fortnight or 3 weeks and then vanish, their places at the long table simply empty one morning, no ceremony, no goodbye. You train a boy named Peter in your 9th year, freckled and quick, who reminds you enough of poor Susan from the linen room that you find yourself, without quite deciding to, being gentler with him than the household was ever gentle with you. You show him how to read the bells. You show him which stairs creak. You tell him, on his 3rd night, lying exhausted in the narrow attic bed that is very like the one you once slept in yourself, that the trick is to stop fighting the clock, to pour himself into the shape of the day like water into a jug, and leave nothing sticking out for the day to catch on, and you watch something in his young frightened face settle slightly at the words, the same way something in yours must have settled all those years ago when Hob first said them to you. You do not tell him everything, not yet. There is a room on the 2nd floor that he will learn about eventually, on some grey morning you cannot predict and cannot prevent. And when that morning comes, you will stand with him at the foot of the back stair exactly as Hob once stood with you, and you will not tell him what you heard through that door on your own worst day, because that is the one rule that matters more than all the others in the book combined, and some weights are not made lighter by sharing them in advance. Some weights simply have to be carried once by every person who walks into this particular household, and the only mercy anyone can offer is to stand beside them while they carry it the first time. That morning comes for Peter, as you knew it eventually would, in your 15th year in this household, on a raw, wet November day that you will remember for the rest of your life, with a clarity none of the ordinary days have earned. Word reaches the servants' hall first as a hush. The same particular hush you learned to recognise on your 22nd day all those years ago, though this one is different, deeper somehow, carrying a weight you haven't felt in this house before. The king's youngest daughter, the princess he is known to love beyond all the rest of his children, has died in the small hours of the morning, worn down finally by a long illness that the household has been quietly, dreadfully aware of for months. You remember her from the terrace, years back, a slight fair-haired girl walking 2 by 2 with her sisters in the gold evening light, and you remember too the particular gentleness in the king's face whenever her name came up among the senior staff, a gentleness he showed toward none of his other grown children in quite the same unguarded way. You are a senior man now, trusted with the sort of duties that once terrified you on your very first morning, and it falls to you that grey afternoon to stand with Peter at the foot of a back stair, not unlike the one you once stood at yourself, because the king, upon learning of his daughter's death, has begun to unravel in a manner the whole household recognises with a cold, sinking dread, though none of them, not even the oldest hands among the senior staff, have ever seen quite so complete or so lasting a collapse as the one that begins this particular November, and, though none of you can know it yet, standing frozen at the foot of that stair, will never fully lift again. Peter's face, when the first raised voice reaches you both through 3 floors of stone, goes exactly the same colour yours must have gone all those years ago, and you put a steadying hand on his shoulder the way Hob once put one on yours, and you do not tell him it will be all right, because you have learned in 15 years that this particular lie helps no one and costs you something every time you tell it. Stand steady, you tell him instead. Don't run. Don't speak unless you're spoken to. And whatever you hear through that door from this hour on, it stays inside you and goes no further. That's the whole of the rule, and it's the only one that's ever really mattered. He stands steady. You are, in a strange, quiet way, proud of him for it. The same way you suspect Hob was quietly proud of you once, though neither of you says so out loud. This time, there is no recovery within a fortnight. The weeks stretch into months, and the months, though you cannot know it standing there in November with Peter's shoulder trembling faintly under your hand, stretch eventually into years, a long slow decline from which the king everyone below stairs has come, in their strange complicated way, to love will not properly return. The terrace walks stop. The gold evening light and the murmuring crowd and the band playing something bright and unhurried, all of it fades quietly away, replaced by a household that turns inward on itself, hushed and careful, tending a man who has finally, after decades of holding the weight steady through every bad day and every good one, simply run out of strength to hold it any longer. You think, in the months that follow, a great deal about the small painted face still hidden in the loose floorboard beneath your bed, worn soft now at the edges from 15 years of your fingers turning it over in the dark on nights you couldn't sleep. A young boy, 6 or 7, dead himself now these many decades, one of the king's own sons who never lived to grow up at all, and you understand, with a clarity that would have eluded you at 16, exactly why that small unguarded face caught at something in you all those years ago. Grief, you have come to learn in this household better than in any other place you might have spent your life, does not stay locked behind one door. It moves through a house the way cold moves through old stone, finding every gap, settling into every corner, no matter how carefully the leather book tries to account for every single minute of every single day. It is in the spring following that terrible November, with the king's condition settled now into something the physicians speak of as permanent rather than passing, that you finally keep the promise you made to yourself all those years ago on your 25th night, lying awake with the floorboard humming beneath you like something alive. You do not hand the 2 small objects to Mrs. Ansell, who has long since retired herself, replaced by a younger woman who never knew you as anything but the steady, capable senior man you've become. Instead, on a quiet afternoon when the second-floor rooms of the Queen's Lodge stand empty and unused, exactly as they did on the day you first found the miniature portrait behind that writing desk, you carry both objects up yourself, the small, gold-framed face and the broken watch, its glass replaced now, its case gently repaired by a careful hour's work, with tools borrowed from the palace's own clockmaker and never once explained to him, and you set them both back inside that same drawer, tucked behind where a hand searching in haste might easily miss them, and a hand searching carefully some day might just as easily find them. You do not know, leaving that room for the last time with your chest strangely light after 15 years of carrying something you never fully admitted to yourself you were carrying, whether anyone will ever find them there at all, or whether they'll simply sit forgotten in that drawer for another 50 years, another 100, until some future servant in some future household, cleaning out a room grown strange and unfamiliar with age, discovers a small painted child's face and a mended watch and wonders, briefly, what story lies behind 2 such quietly private things left behind in an empty drawer. You find, standing in the doorway a moment before you finally close it, that you don't much mind either way. The weight is set down. That, in the end, is the whole of what you needed from it. But that afternoon is still some years off yet. Tonight, on this particular ordinary evening in your 15th year, the household is quiet, careful, full of nothing more dramatic than cooling suppers and tired feet, moving softly past doors that must not be disturbed, and you climb the familiar back stair one last time before bed. The stone worn smooth now in patches you remember being rough. The whole route so deep in your legs and your hands that you barely need the single candle you carry to find your way. You think, sometimes, on nights like this, about the boy who arrived here 11 days after 11 other boys had already given up and gone home, his hands soft, his father's pride still warm on his shoulders, certain he understood what work meant and understanding, in truth, almost nothing at all. That boy is still somewhere inside you, you think. He's just been folded in, the way a crease gets pressed into linen and stays there long after the sheet has been used and washed 100 times over. You can still find the shape of him if you look. You're not sure you'd want to lose it entirely, even if you could. The candle gutters as you reach the top of the stair, and you shield the flame with one cupped hand, the same practised motion you've made 10,000 times now without thinking, and somewhere below you, through the thick old walls of a house that has stood through worse nights than any you witnessed as a boy, and will go on standing through worse nights than any you can yet fully imagine. A king you have come, in your strange and complicated way, almost to love, sits now in rooms grown quiet and dim, further from the world with each passing season, tended by physicians and pages who move around him with the same careful, practised hush the household taught you on your very first morning all those years ago, when 6 minutes past 6 felt like the end of everything you'd ever known. Centuries from now, none of this will look anything like it looks tonight. The house will change hands and change names and change purposes more times than anyone currently living within its walls could guess. The bells that mark out every minute of every day will fall silent, replaced eventually by clocks nobody has to wind, and then by something else again that nobody here could begin to picture. The leather book with its unforgiving minutes will end up perhaps behind glass in some quiet room, an object of curiosity rather than dread, visited by people who will never once in their lives have to carry coal up 4 flights of stairs before dawn. But something in it will not change, you think, easing your door shut behind you now, setting the candle down, sitting on the edge of a bed that no longer feels too narrow because you have long since stopped noticing its size. Somewhere, always, there will be a household like this one, a great structure of duty and fear and small mercies, built by frightened people around something too large and too fragile to be left unguarded, whether that something is a crown or simply a family trying to hold itself together through its worst days. And somewhere inside that structure there will always be a boy or a girl, arriving for the first time with soft hands and a parent's proud words still ringing in their ears, certain they understand what the work will cost them, understanding almost nothing at all. You blow out the candle. The dark that settles over the small room is complete, familiar, no longer frightening the way the first dark in this house once frightened you, 11 days into a job that 11 boys before you had already failed to survive. You can hear faintly through the old stone the last sounds of the household settling for the night. A door somewhere, a low voice, the particular creak of the 3rd stair down that you have learned, over years now, to step around without thinking. You are tired in the way you've been tired every single night for longer than you can easily count anymore, An ache settled so deep into your hands and your shoulders and the soles of your feet that it no longer feels like pain exactly. Just wait. Just the honest cost of a day spent holding something larger than yourself steady. You think of Josiah at 16, hands raw from a rope handle, standing frozen at the foot of a stair while a voice on the other side of a locked door begs simply to be let go home. You think of the king out walking among his roses the week after, 4 ordinary words and a nod. Fine morning. What? No sign at all from the outside of what had passed behind that door, and you understand now, in a way that 16-year-old boy could not yet understand, that this is what survival looks like in a house like this one. Not the absence of the terrible days, just the quiet, unglamorous, unbroken habit of getting up again after them, coal and brass and bells, one foot in front of the other, until the weight becomes simply the shape of your life rather than a thing pressing down upon it. You will grow old in this household, though you cannot know it yet, standing at the top of this particular stair on this particular ordinary evening. You will see Peter through his own worst mornings the way Hob once saw you through yours, and you will see him rise in time to train boys of his own, the whole long chain of frightened, exhausted, quietly determined servants stretching backward and forward through this house, further than any single one of you can properly trace. You will watch the king you once feared, and later loved, fade slowly out of the world he once held together through sheer stubborn habit. Watch the terrace stand empty on fine evenings that once drew half the town to the wall to see him pass. Watch a young prince you once carried a message to grow into a regent, and then, many years further on than you can presently imagine, into a king himself, ruling in his father's place over a household that will, you suspect without quite being able to say why, always carry some faint echo of the leather book's unforgiving minutes, no matter how many generations pass through it. You will grow stiff in the knees the way Hob was stiff when you first knew him, your own knuckles reddening permanently from decades of cold water and vinegar-scented paste, your hands, when you finally look at them properly on some quiet evening near the very end of your service, no longer recognizable as the soft, unmarked hands your father shook with such pride at the park gate all those years before. You will not mind this the way you once feared you might. A hand that has done honest work for 40 years wears its history the way old stone wears the passage of centuries, not as a wound but as a record, proof of every great laid, every pail carried, every small private mercy extended to a boy too frightened to know yet that he would last. That is enough, warm enough, fed enough, needed enough, tired enough to finally rest. That is enough for tonight. Let the last of the household sounds fade beneath the old stone floor. Let the ache in your hands soften into something almost like comfort, the way it always does, eventually, once you stop fighting the shape of it. Let the bells that will call you again in a few short hours stay silent a little longer yet. Tomorrow the clock will start again at 4. But that is tomorrow. Centuries will pass over this house long after the last of you are gone. The leather book with its unforgiving minutes will crumble, or be locked away behind glass, or simply be lost the way so many small, exacting, once vital things are eventually lost. The bells that ring out every hour of every day will fall silent, replaced by clocks nobody living has to wind, and then by something else again that none of you standing in this dark attic tonight could begin to picture. The terrace will still draw its crowds, though the faces watching and the faces walking will belong to people not yet born, kings and queens whose names you will never learn, servants climbing stairs not yet built, carrying burdens shaped by fears none of you can currently imagine. But something in it will not change. Somewhere, always, there will be a household like this one, a great fragile structure of duty and habit and small private mercies built around something too large to be left unguarded. Whether that something is a crown or simply a family holding itself together through its worst days. And somewhere inside that structure, there will always be a boy or a girl arriving for the first time with soft hands and a parent's proud words still ringing in their ears, certain they understand what the work will cost them, understanding almost nothing at all. They will learn, the way you learned, that the weight does not lift. They will learn too, the way you learned, that a person can carry a great deal more than they ever believed possible, provided they stop fighting the shape of the day and simply pour themselves into it, 1 hour at a time, one bell at a time, until the weight itself becomes, almost without their noticing the change, the plain unglamorous shape of an honest life well spent. Tonight, there is only this, the dark, familiar and complete. The old house breathing slowly around you the way it has breathed around every frightened, exhausted, quietly determined servant who has ever climbed these same worn stairs before you, and will breathe around everyone who climbs them long after you're gone. Some things in a house like this do not change, no matter how many centuries pass over its roof. The need for rest at the end of a long day is one of them. It never changes. It never will. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it has taken every tired servant in every quiet room in this old house for longer than anyone now living can properly remember. Let the bells go silent. Let the weight of the day soften and settle. And finally let you go. You've earned this rest. Take it. Good night.